Okay. We had finished the previous chapter, paragraph on page 40 last time. Um, that one, oh, Abigail. And I think we'd finished it. If there's more to be said, please let me know. Otherwise, we are probably ready to talk about her more ordinary life. Would anyone like to begin reading?
Well, since I'm unmuted, I would start. And now, Abigail, concerning thy well-being in this life, this is my advice and counsel unto thee. Love thy dear mother, and ever obey her and honor her, and see thou grieve her not. Be not stubborn nor wilful, but submit unto her, and be as an obedient child unto her, whose love and care hath been too great over thee and thy sisters, which hath brought too much trouble upon herself. Learn in thy youth to read and write a little, and sew and knit, and all points of good labor that belong to a maid, and flee idleness and sloth that nourish sin. And as thou growest up in years, labor in the affairs of the country, and beware of pride, and riotousness, and curiosity. But be well content with such apparel as thy mother will permit thee, and as thou mayest be a good example unto others in. Be not wanton, nor wild, nor light, but temperate, moderate, and chaste, and not forward in words nor speech, but swift to hear, slow to speak. And do thou always live with thy mother, and be a help unto her, and cherish her in her old age and latter years, that she may be comforted in thee, and her soul may bless thee. I think I'll stop there.
I'm wondering about, I'm wondering if this advice to a young woman is in any way, if there's anything about it that sounds more Quaker than, I mean, I'm sure that there were many good Puritan families and Catholic families and Presbyterian families who wanted their children to grow up faithfully and help in healthy ways. Uh, as I ask myself, I do wonder about the learning to read and write. I think that might be something unique to those people in that time. And laboring in the affairs of the country, which seems really very progressive. Um, and I guess I wonder, this is a sociologic question. Was this an age in which it was very typical for moms, families to live together? So the mother in her old age would not be abandoned. This was not necessarily an instruction to stay an old maid. I don't know.
I know that Howgill was married twice, and I'm guessing that Abigail is the child of the second marriage, and if there were children by the first marriage, then Abigail's mom is not their mother. I mean, not their biological mother, and they might be more easily excused from taking care of a stepmom if there is a daughter by birth to the second wife. So he may be saying, here's the one who gave birth to you. Somebody's got to take care of her in her old age. You're it. Please. I mean, that's kind of what I would say if I were the father who was in prison for life. I being this being the 21st century, I'd be more shy about asking that of her. But this was the persecuted Quaker people in the 1600s. Life was hard and dangerous. Somebody's got to look after mom.
I think to the second part of what Madeline was asking, in the later paragraphs, he speaks about her potential for getting married. I don't think, and so I was wondering the same thing as I read this. And it says, "Do thou always live with thy mother?" That could mean that thy mother lived with her and her husband. And so, as John was saying, this sounds more like a request that she always live with her mother, but not that she live in her mother's house.
Oh, thanks for that, Richard.
As I read it, it seems to me pretty sound, straightforward advice. A couple of things I know. One is where does it say here? Labour in the affairs of the country. And it depends what you think by country, whether it was just around them, in other words, be involved in the community around you, or whether it is actually, as Francis Howgill did himself, be involved in the bigger affairs of the country in terms of the challenging of legal and religious order. I don't know. I know I can't help but notice when he's saying don't be wanton or wild, etc., but swift to hear, slow to speak. That's a quote straight out of the letter of James. I wondered actually when I read the bit at the end, be always courteous. Where's the bit? It says 3 sisters she's got to be with, and later on, my brother Thomas. So I don't know who was part of what marriage there, but it's actually quite a family, isn't it? So it's 4 children. Is it 5? I don't know how many sisters there are, but it's 4 or 5 kids. But Howgill had a good farm. Anyway.
When I read through this today, it reminded me of the character Polonius in the play Hamlet, who gives a long speech to his son Laertes as he's about to depart from Denmark to France. And it's full of this kind of reference to virtues that he wants Laertes to be mindful of. And it occurred to me that this seems like a pattern that you often see in the epistles, is like there's the substantial spiritual wisdom that occurs first, and then towards the end there's sort of a lighter movement towards everyday necessities. And that made me think that there's a difference between that earlier culture, which was patriarchal, and one of the responsibilities of the patriarch was to advise the youth. And how our modern times have don't recognize that as a responsibility so much. I mean, I think it has to do with different circumstances. Things change very rapidly now, and an older generation may be less capable of navigating the world than a younger generation in terms of, say, as we all know, technology has moved very rapidly in our time, and most of us, I imagine, feel less capable than our children are of handling the technical advances. So that's what stood out for me, was the difference in the culture and in the time. And although I probably would not have thought so when I was young, I think that there's a good advantage in that cross-generational exchange of advice that he's providing to her, and was typical earlier in our civilization.
I'd like to say, even though I was the son who got away from home as early as possible and got as far away from my parents as I could, and my younger brother was the one that stayed there and was at the deathbed of both his parents while I was far away. So I'm not a good example. I've noticed that the Old Testament, as we Christians have it, ends with a warning that Elijah is coming back to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to the parents, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. Like wow, that's powerful. If the bond between parents and children is not sound, the earth is in danger. And it's very sobering. And so I have one child with whom my contact is intermittent, who is mentally ill, and the other one that I try to write a text message to every day, who is the one who is my number one healthcare proxy and comes out to visit me and scold me if my diet is not right or my health maintenance habits are wanting. It just feels like a great blessing because I don't have somebody of mature years, but not aged like myself, to ask after me. Who do I have?
I couldn't help thinking as Patricia was speaking about the habit of maybe from these ages of writing out clear advice to children. I've also William Penn's oft reprinted maxims and advices to his children, where he lays out a lot of stuff pretty squarely too. Anyway.
My ruminations upon the Lord often lead me, whether they're right or not, into thinking about the importance of relationships, which things are most important: God, country, other associations. And family always seems to me to rise up to being very much next to God and above country and university and multinational corporation, whatever one is affiliated with. And it seems like almost in every culture, we see people resisting the breakdown of that. And of course, that's tried in every fascist culture of taking babies away from children, away from parents, and indoctrinating them and essentially breaking up the family. It was done as well amongst African slaves in the American colonies. It's now codified in law as a kind of genocide to do that, as has happened in Ukraine with the war. And it just seems that it's very easy for us to lose sight of how important the family bonds are. And those family bonds don't stay well without people talking about them. There was some suggestion that we read some of the ministers like Stephen Crispin and the other one, and they both start with, in some of the sermons that I had a chance to read, with messages about how their ministry, their preaching, was to help each of us better form our relationship to the Lord. And so it seems as though this kind of paragraph is, as we said, it's to better form a relationship with parents and children. And in the next paragraph discusses spouses, as I mentioned. That these things don't necessarily happen unless we talk about them, especially those of us who are on the elder side and have a chance to see the importance of them and the possibility for disruption in them. And yet, kind of as to what Pat was saying, I think when I was a child, that my parents never said such things, and I would have thought it'd been, well, in our family, it would have been maybe redundant, but it would also seem preachy in the bad sense. It would also seem maybe something I would have resisted hearing. Similar to the way sometimes we resist what the Lord is telling us. And maybe when one is in a situation such as Howgill, when even though still alive, the end is so potentially present. It's a good time. As good a time as any to instruct our children in how important it is that they look to their parents and the things that are solid, the things that they can rely upon.
I've just noticed in rereading through this, skimming over the paragraph again, how much of the advice is to avoid particular sins. Don't grieve your mother. Don't be stubborn. Don't be willful. Let's see, flee idleness and sloth. Beware of pride, riotousness, curiosity. Be not wanton, wild, nor light. I mean, he does have some virtues in there listed, but it seems a little more heavily weighted on things to avoid. And I think that makes sense because even though her moving towards the Lord is what he is wanting, he's listing typical ways that can obstruct that realization of faith. And to avoid those stumbling blocks, which is sort of what the law, Moses's law, does also with all the thou shalt nots. So I think it makes sense because God is, as David has mentioned a couple of times, God is totally responsible for our salvation, and we are totally responsible for a failure to come into that. So what he's doing frequently in this paragraph is pointing out the problems that prevent our coming into salvation, knowing that it's not by our virtue that we enter salvation, it's by God's act that restores us. So it makes sense that he's identifying the part that we have to play, which is to avoid being distracted and damaging the possibility of moving in the right direction through capitulating to sin.
Not to put you on the spot too much, Tom, feel free to ignore me, but since you are a birthright Quaker, I was curious if there was any explicit communication like this in your family.
Yeah, thanks, Madeline. There's a lot going through my head right now. It's not really gelled very well. Um, Sort of like Pat was just saying, I'm reading this paragraph uh, with the thought of uh, what in Francis Howgill's mind were the implications of uh, this kind of lifestyle, this conduct, pro and con. What are the implications on the spiritual maturity? Um, and with the thinking, as you say, just as the kind of way I was raised, um, I can really identify with a bit more sober lifestyle. Just uh, what's coming to mind is um, that it's not only that we need to avoid the sins because of the social ills that are involved, but also because they impede one's ability to be receptive to the guidance of the Lord on a daily and hourly um, basis. Does that make any sense? Um, I'm thinking. I don't want to talk about myself too much, but um, a, a lot of Quakers well, some Quakers are raised to avoid alcohol, and with the reasoning that just leads to social ills and a depraved life. And I was always taught that the primary reason to avoid alcohol is because that simply impedes one's ability to be receptive to the guidance of the Lord, whenever that might come. I'm sorry, I'm not being more focused on what I'm saying, but I think there's a lot of relevance here in what Francis Howgill's advice is, relevance to um, his concern for um, his daughter's spiritual maturing.
Thank you, Tom. That means a lot to me.
I agree. I think it was very clear, and I just wish I were around your brain for the next day as more and more examples come up.
I'm glad that he included the word curiosity here. I suppose that, beware pride and riotousness and curiosity. I'm supposing that curiosity is referring just to the kind of curiosity that leads to gossip and wanting to know the latest, uh, you know, scandal, local scandal or whatever. That's just my guess as to what that's referencing.
Well, when I think of curiosity, I think of the journal of Joseph Hoag, where the young Quaker boys of his neighborhood and generation were sneaking off to an unoccupied building and dancing to the fiddle, maybe with neighborhood Quaker girls. And Joseph was caught between the duty of a good friend to keep what the children were doing absolutely hidden from the grown-ups, and his sense that it was wrong behavior and that he should not participate in it. And he got himself into big trouble because he wouldn't rat on his age mates, but neither would he impeach himself by saying, yeah, I did it to myself. He just, as I recall, kept silent and so endured being under suspicion. That's a heavy cross for a young child to bear. And there are always, kids are always curious, and they're always curious about dangerous things. I was fortunately, I was too scared of marijuana in high school, but not too scared of it in college. I wish I hadn't gotten tempted by it, but children are curious, and in every generation there are temptations, and for girls in any society there is the temptation of premature sexual behavior, which in an age of no birth control could ruin a girl for life. And I'm sure that that's somewhere in Frances Howgill's mind. Curiosity could also be, what's life like outside our village? And if she wanders outside the village, she's likely to be preyed upon unless she's, traveling with somebody to protect her. And especially if she's a young Quaker, there are a lot of people out there that hate Quakers. So I I hate to think of all the things that Frances Howgill might be afraid um, of for Abigail's sake, that curiosity might lead her into. I'm also thinking of my own responsibilities as a parent. Um, I could see that my little boy was being tempted by images on TV of cartoon characters doing violence to one another on cartoon shows. And I thought, that's horrible. I remember telling him, uh, listen, I would rather that you be good than that you be smart, because I knew that the educational system was always rewarding smartness, but didn't really care much about children's morality. Um, and that my life as a parent would be standing for sound morality, as opposed to the things that society rewards, like cleverness, um, the cleverness of rapacious businessmen and social climbers. Um, and how do I distill this into the most basic messages? Just don't lie. Don't do evil. Don't hurt back when somebody hurts you. And I knew my window of opportunity to influence my children was short and small, because I worked long hours. I had a very unhappy relationship with their mother, and they could see it, and that she was a bully, though I would never speak ill of her um, to the children. Um, it was in ways, when I read this, I think of Howgill in prison having a very narrow window to address Abigail through. And that's how I felt as a prisoner of my work life, which sometimes had me working till 2 and 3 in the morning and having to get up and leave home at 7. Of it's frightening and daunting. And my heart is going out to Frances Howgill as I read this.
Well, if friends feel ready, perhaps we could go to his next advice about relationships. You know,
I think there's a bit more
okay, go
here.
ahead.
I've been appreciating that the thoughts have kind of easily flowed here, because this is less of a deep section, as we've noted, than others. On this idea of curiosity, I haven't found anything in my life ever, and even in reading of early friends, where curiosity of the natural world curiosity that is needed to learn about things, to question, is ever a problem. And as I was listening to John, I thought a lot of the curiosity that does us in goes by what modern teens call the fear of missing out, wishing to do things just to see what they like, which is a very dangerous thing. Particularly when one doesn't know, as John was describing, leaving the village, one doesn't know what evils are out there. One doesn't know how one will be affected. The intellectual curiosity, I could see, and I sometimes got the sense in reading about the history of conservative friends that sometimes people left the faith unnecessarily because they felt stymied in intellectual curiosity. And there may be some reason for which that's dangerous, and I'd like to think about that. But the other side of curiosity, of the fear of missing out, of having to experience the world, it seems to me friends always know that and can teach their children there's a lot of the enemy out there, and to be wary of that, of things that smack of the enemy, whether it's alcohol or dancing or whatever, is not, it doesn't seem like a bad thing. So that distinction I'd like to put out there. The other one that I'm curious about is this word light, as to what that means. I've recently had some thoughts about the effects, sometimes positive, of humor. And humor might be considered lightness. And is humor a bad thing? And I don't know where I've read anything about that amongst early friends. What does this word light mean?
I took it to mean frivolous, but maybe there's a lot more to it.
Yes, frivolous and superficiality, perhaps.
The concern there again is joy, a kind of lightness.
I can't help thinking of how much humor is a mask for othering, making fun of a scapegoat. Did you hear the one about the fool who said blah, blah, blah? And everyone laughs at the fictitious fool. But the person that feels like a fool, who's maybe the youngest child in a group of children, is hurt by everyone laughing at the fictitious fool.
I can relate to what he is saying, John. I have a hard time myself with most stand-up comics and things like that that are on the current modern scene. And yet when I find one who's continuously taking himself for the fool, I often find the humors much more to my liking. And that's rare.
I might just comment briefly that I think the three words in the sentence wanton, wild, and light are, in my understanding, there's a danger here of self-centeredness, because wanton was a thing about sort of lust and greed, really, which is pretty self-centered, what I want. And so is wild, going and doing my own thing, perhaps in the sense of even damaging other people or other property or something like that, just so I can have my own way. And light, my guess, is also self-centered. There's a danger in being very jocular or frivolous, of making fun of other people or something or other, or saying things just to make a person look the center of attention or good or something like that. So that, in my way of reading this, the three things are three aspects of self-centeredness, which is not good.
The idea occurred to me about those three words, in that each of them is without consideration of consequences. That while they may be entertaining or amusing in the moment, that they don't consider the effects of that action. There's no integration of the present and what is to come. It seems like there's a more thoughtful way of being that Howgill is promoting, which is keep in mind what is the central integrating principle of your life, and don't let behavior fly off away from that, but keep in mind what you're oriented to and what your goal is, and make your present behavior represent that awareness.
Yes, yes. And that, for me, encapsulates my understanding of conservative friends' concern about intellectual development, just for the sake of that alone. Uh, Priority needs to be focused on attention to one's spiritual life. We have a number of old autograph books here from when my ancestors attended Olney, and they would graduate and have these autograph books with little sayings with people's signatures, and one in particular always jumped out, meant a lot to me. It jumped out at me. The quote, if I can remember it correctly, how empty learning and how vain is art, save where it guides the life and minds the heart. That orientation explains a lot to me about friends' concern about pursuing learning just for the sake of obsessing on learning.
I think there's I can see that the validity of that, but I also think that there's something else about improving the intellect. And from my own experience, I can recall trusting in the intellect because it delivered truth. I mean, you could discern truth from falsehood, and wanting truth and believing in the stability that it gave to me to understand things caused me to pursue intellectual areas. And I think that I don't see a conflict between the intellect and the spirit there, because my goal was understanding. And all I knew as a child and a young person was that my mind could help me move towards understanding, which I loved. I, not knowing God as a child or a young person, I had no way of knowing that there was another way that knowledge could be imparted to me from God. All I had was my natural ability of thinking and feeling. But those things were developed, I feel, because the goal was understanding. I just was working with the only tools I had, not knowing that there was a greater way of receiving understanding, which was given through grace. That was just not on my radar. I had no knowledge of that until it was given to me. And then I knew and could regulate better my relationship with my intellect and see where it was needed and where it wasn't. What else was needed instead. But I balk at there being this cut and dried division between intellect and spirit. I see, are we using the gifts that we've been given naturally to understand is incumbent upon us. These are gifts from God that we use. But I can see how certainly I can see, often I think of scholars, how they accumulate knowledge, and it's just for no other reason than to become experts, you know, and it's not subordinate to the greater end.
Well, we're a bit past our appointed time, so I will bring the recording to a close.